Well, on today's show, I have the pleasure of talking with Sean Abley, and I looked your name up and I think I pronounced it correctly.
Yes, thank you very much. You too.
I know you from Fangoria, but as you dig deeper, you've written some influential books. You got an upcoming book we're going to talk a lot about. And a new thing I learned about you is you're a playwright, and you
Mhm.
are really pursuing that in a very big way right now. So I want to make that a big part of our talk today, too. So welcome to the show, Sean.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for
You know, I
stalking the line.
Well, I love theater, and I really want to talk about that, even though we both love horror movies and we're into, all sorts of kind of, fun stuff like that. I want to see how you translate campy old movies into stage musicals and just how you're
Mm,
embracing, the love of the stage and what's, exciting you now creatively. Because I think a
mhm.
lot of times when you have a past like you and you've done things like screenwriting and, column writing, that it's hard for people to let go of that and look at the new Sean and what Sean is currently into. And I promise I won't refer you to you in the third person anymore.
Well, I will. So Sean Abley really enjoys playwriting these days. Yeah, it's funny because many years ago, in the early 90s, I started writing plays because I was an actor back then, and I was in Chicago, and I just wasn't getting cast and stuff, or was going up for stuff that I just didn't want. And so I decided to write my own play, and my very first play was a stage adaptation of Ted V. Michael's Corpse Grinders.
Oh, wow.
So, right, yeah. So my love of horror and theater were together literally from the very beginning. Um, and that that was it was a huge bomb. By the way, it was a it was it was yeah. The one review that we got started out with um gross, misogynistic, and unnecessary. That's a quote. That's what the reviewer started out with. And the last line of the review was, I was stunned by the sheer worthlessness of it all. And I mean, I take that as a badge of honor. If you're putting Ted V. Michaels on stage, I mean, I feel like that's, like an A plus review. So,
A review any better, and it just would not be Ted V. Michaels.
right. Like they gave me the pull quotes, like they were right there. So, thank you very much.
I'm going to go into your bio because you really, I think you don't play it up enough that you have so many amazing credits and experiences. So I'm gonna dig into that a little bit, put you on the spot. But
Okay.
before that, I've got a lightning round of three questions so
Oh
that
boy.
people can really get to know you quickly.
Okay.
And so I think you helped me with my first one. What is your favorite Ted V. Michaels movie of all time?
It is, in fact, Corpse Grinders. Although, um, Astro Zombies is a close second.
Okay, what is your favorite serious play of all time? Not campy, just an out and out quality, revered play.
It would be a toss up between Arcadia and Angels in America. The whole the whole 2 evenings put together.
And did you have a hand in getting Fangoria back into print?
No, I'm sorry to laugh at that question. I did not. I am certainly, although I'm very happy with where I am with Vangoria. I am a freelancer who is, humbly approaching them with my pitches, and they're thankfully taking.
Okay, and as a bonus question to that, since you write a great column called
Currently, it's called "Problematic Films: in defense of insert name of film here."
And I was reading some of those. You did one on I Spit on Your Grave, and you have like a guest on or a guest. I don't know. Since it's in print, I wouldn't say a guest speaker, but you had kind of a co-writer. It's like an interview format where you talk about one film, and they
Mm-hmm.
have a unique perspective. And I'm just wondering, what have you gotten out of that? Because I'm surprised that in each of the columns I read, you don't just trash it, which is so fashionable nowadays, but you, I think, do a good job of putting things into context. And I think both you and the people you have, I think you give all these movies a fair shot.
Well, I my philosophy has been for a long time that sometimes things that we love have an expiration date, right? And it doesn't mean we were wrong for loving them when they first arrived on the scene. It doesn't mean we're wrong for continuing to love them. Um, but I also think that it's just helpful at times to, rather than just throw them out with the garbage, to contextualize them and um, uh, examine the parts that are problematic and possibly, I don't know, too problematic to for something to like be still available and like widely available in popular culture. And what I'm getting out of it is, I don't know, how do I put this? Um, More insight than my own into why these films have value today. And it's typically because the person, I say that I'm in conversation with, these guests that you mentioned, I find somebody that has standing to defend the film. Like what you mentioned, I Spit on Your Grave, and I asked BJ Colangelo to be in conversation with me, and she has been very upfront. She talks about that film all the time. She's defended that film for years and years and years. And the reason is that she was sexually assaulted when she was very young, and that film, watching that film, told her, and I'm paraphrasing her, and BJ, if you're watching this, I apologize for paraphrasing you. She said that film showed her that she didn't have to be, you know, eternally destroyed by this thing that happened to her, that she could have power in her life still, um, despite what had happened to her. And that was, I wasn't actually looking at the film in that way. I mean, I'm also a survivor of sexual abuse, and I've always defended the film. And parts of it make me uncomfortable. But yeah, so I got that from her.
Mhm.
Uh, I spoke to Calpurnia Adams, who's a transgender entertainer of a certain age, mine. We talked about Sleepaway Camp, which is beloved, right? But the ending, it's just like, here's a transgender person and they are a monster. And she's a big fan of the film, as
Mhm.
am I. And she gave me some really great insight into, for her, it's not, unlike BJ's experience with I Spit on Your Grave, with Calpurnia, it's not like there's nothing affirmative for her in that film, but she looks at it as like a film scholar, right? Like its place in, exploitation cinema, and the value of like a good scare and a good gross out and a good shocking ending. Um, as she says, like it shows the worst version of the trans experience you could possibly have on film, but as a person with a sense of humor and an admiration for, exploitation films, she still finds it enjoyable.
Sure.
So yeah.
Well, I want to talk more about exploitation films later, and I don't know about you, but I not grew up, but maybe when I was 19 or 20, saw my first John Water films, which
Oh.
isn't horror per se, but has influenced me, and I think
Mhm.
it coincided with seeing grindhouse cinema and things that especially when you're coming of age, things that were forbidden to you, and now
Mhm.
you're old enough to see these on your own. And for me, drive-in movie kind of sensibilities, just embracing that, Joe Bob Briggs. And it's
Mhm.
really tough if someone who embraced trash, before it became fashionable, before it went through the Tarantino filter,
Mhm.
before people just started dissecting the trashy fun films, that
Right.
there was just kind of that innocence during the 80s when we could binge on these on VHS and not have so much weight connected to them, where we were just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they actually put this on film. I don't know what to think of it. But we didn't
Right.
have to immediately go to Reddit and see what other people thought.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting because the way you describe that, I sort of blame Something Weird Video for, you know, starting the era of, readily accessible grindhouse and drive-in movies, right? Like they some through their detective work and witchcraft managed to sort of unearth all this great stuff and distribute it. Um, and it was very, but even then it was very solitary, right? It was like, video stores started, and you had a couple different choices. You had like the, studio stuff, then you had the emerging direct to video stuff, which was largely horror films, and then you had stuff like, the retro, like something weird, culty cult stuff to choose from. And but you'd still like take it home and watch it by yourself, or maybe a couple other people. And now you're right. Now it's just like it's I'm writing this book, and I'm assuming we'll talk about it later, a reference book, and I can find even the most obscure queer horror shot on video, teeny tiny, 60 millimeter, 8 millimeter, whatever, and somebody's already found it and written about it.
Hmm.
So I think I think the good outweighs the bad, right? Like I think it's nice to have a community that we can sort of, you know, uh, connect with, but it is a bit of a bum out at times when, you know, there could be another column, problematic films, insert name of film, and there's no in defense of, right? It's just like, you know, pulling it apart. Um, yeah, it's interesting. Maybe it's this is just sort of coming to my head right now, so I apologize for the sort of unformed thought. Maybe the sort of the isolation and the the grimy guilt of it was part of the fun. I don't know. It's, where there certainly was, an era of, the raincoat brigade, as they call them, that would go to the Times Square grindhouse films and like sit there by themselves and watch, the Incredible Torture Show or something like that. And now
Hmm.
we're doing it in our home by ourselves. um I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like maybe progress made it a little less fun.
Right. And I think part of it for me, I wouldn't necessarily want to go back to not having access, but when you see all this stuff posted on YouTube for free, that back then we'd have to find some specialty magazine like a psychotronic kind of, or probably some even lesser zine, and someone would have a bootleg they'd be selling for 50 or $60, which back in the 80s seemed like a fortune, and
Right.
it was just hard to get it. So by the time you actually got it or found it, you felt like you won a prize already, and you just kind of felt like, you know, I'm really dedicated to this. I'm invested in this before I even watch it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I remember Psychotronic, and also reading Deep Red, Chaz
Hmm.
Bowen's Deep Red. Um, in addition to like Fangoria and Famous Monsters, and those were the two that sort of kind of connected me to that stuff. And fanzines. Like I was big into the
Hmm.
fanzine world. There was less horror fanzines, and then there were science fiction, but um, could find that there. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I don't want to go back to where they're unavailable. But you know what it was? It was the like you're right. It was the work to get it. And it
Hmm.
was the, looking at like the back page of Fangoria magazine where they in the, original flavor, which I've been reading since issue number 1, which sort of tells you how old I am. Where they had the personal ads, and in those personal ads would be some also display ads, and it would be like teeny tiny, names of movies, and you would have to fill something out and send a check, and eventually it would come in the mail, and like 16 millimeter reels, things like that. Um, I was talking about this the other day with a friend. We were at dinner and we were talking about theater, actually, at this theater retreat that I threw, and this playwriting retreat that I threw. And I challenged everyone when we were like talking about shows, and do you remember the show and who directed the show? I challenged everybody not to pick up their phone, because I miss the era of the work you had to do to figure something out when you're talking about like popular culture, right? Like who was that in that, and they were also in that, and what was the title? That I missed that conversation, because now it's like, hey, what was the? Oh, hang on. Oh, it was whoever, and I just I feel like the discourse. I don't know. I mean, I'm glad that we have like the online and the the Twitters and the message boards and all that stuff where people can communicate and connect that wouldn't necessarily be able to. But the in-person conversations, I miss, just like trying to excavate your brain to remember, facts about this stuff that we love.
Right, and I think when we got these facts, it was experiential. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
just an entry on Wikipedia. Like we might remember an actress from, 10 Violent Women, my favorite Ted V. Michaels, because we saw it, because we
Yeah.
read the video box. And I think when you're just reading stuff off of Wikipedia, it's too easy to dismiss. I think it's the whole idea of investment. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I think even if we find a film is problematic by today's standards, you still feel a need to defend it just a little bit, just for the sheer fact it existed back then.
Yeah, and I think it also is a roadmap to like where we are now, and that's important. Like history is important, right? Sleepaway Camp is, a signpost in the trans experience in America. And to make that film go away would be disingenuous, would be disrespectful to the trans experience, because you wouldn't have something, the trans community wouldn't have something. And of course, I don't want to speak for the trans community, I don't mean to do that, but to point back to and say this is where we've come from, like this terrible representation is where we come from, and this is why it's harmful, and this is why we need to be where we are, today. Um so just from that
Don't,
point of view.
don't you think another thing is, looking back at something from 40 or 30 years ago, even, and how we look at it now, I also remind myself 30 years from now, 40 years from now, there'll be a different take on things too. We can't
Hmm.
always just be so, self-centered to think, okay, in 2021, we found the definitive answer to
Right.
everything.
Right. Yes. Yes, it's that weird, narcissism that everybody has, and that this moment right now is the moment, and my thoughts right now are the thoughts. And but at the same time going, oh my gosh, I've changed so much since I was a teenager, but not acknowledging that, 20 years from now you might have a different perspective on something. And that's like how art is created. Like your perspective in the moment is how art is created. um
Well, another
yeah.
layer to all this, and you know this from both sides, from both a reviewer and a journalist, but also as a creator, a writer, and you've worked in film also. I think one thing that is missing some of the times from these conversations is just what it's like to be a no budget filmmaker. And let's face it, these classics were made on no budget. Ted V. Michaels, the original, I Spit on Your Grave. And a lot of times it wasn't necessarily misogyny or just any kind of, calculated plan. It's
Mhm.
okay, we have no money. What can we do here? We've got
Right.
blood, we've got a knife. Okay, this genre, let's have a killer. I think most of the time they just did what was convenient to add some production value.
Well, you and I both know, have both been in the trenches of low and ultra low and micro budget filmmaking. And, um, uh, part of it is, you're right. It's like we have an actress who's willing to take off her top. That will sell movies. Done. It's sort of the embedded, institutionalized misogyny, but it's, and I don't want to give these guys a pass, but it's sort of the passive. It's like these guys don't hate women; they're just looking at a thing and like figuring out how to sell it. There were women involved in that too, like Doris Wishman. There was women exploitation filmmakers as well. Um, and and also to your previous point, like the reason we're talking today is because you made La Cage aux Zombies for, I'm assuming, like no money back in the day, and
No
here we
money.
are, years and years and years later, and it's a piece of history of queer horror cinema, one that I'd heard about for years and sought out because I'm working on a reference book about it. So these things, again, it's like, in an era where we're currently literally rewriting history books and like literally whitewashing them, it's important in any aspect that we can, that we have any control over, to like make sure history is
Mhm.
preserved. So
Well, a
um
big part
as
of all this is, it's easy to look back. I think one thing, especially younger people now, you know, fresh out of school, they know everything because they've taken a few film studies classes. And
right.
but the one thing I wish they could realize, that they didn't live through is just the total lack of representation. And that it was just a big deal, whether it was seen as good, bad, or indifferent, just getting out there to represent a gay character, a character in drag, and also realize most of this wasn't a calculated political thing. It was just sort of, dipping your toe in the water to see if you could do it. To think,
Mhm.
oh my goodness, what's going to happen? I've got, this one character in drag, different parts. That was a big deal. People don't realize the world didn't start with RuPaul's Drag Race. You know, and just to see, certain representations, you felt like you're doing something really big, and you didn't dare to go beyond that.
Yeah, and then for the viewer, right? Like I grew up in Helena, Montana, and one of my favorite films of all time is Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, and there's the two gay grave diggers in that movie, and that was literally the first time I saw myself in a horror movie. I'd seen other gay characters, I'd seen coded characters, but those two grave diggers acted like me, they talked like me, and so that, whether intended or not, that has value. There's a really interesting documentary called Discourse about the trans experience in media, and I'm so upset that I can't remember the name of the speaker who was talking, but she said, without all of these terrible representations, I wouldn't have known who I was. I wouldn't have seen who I was, and I might not even be here right now. And I don't want to lay that on all these films, but it there can, good can be gleaned from the bad, and I will always be the advocate for making sure that it exists, and it sticks around, and that it isn't banished because of its content, because I feel like that's just
Well, if
not
you
how
look
how
back,
we do things here.
well, if you look back on representation in movies, you see a lot of baby steps. It's
Mhm,
easy for someone now in 2021 to say, "Why didn't you just make this big leapfrog?"
mhm,
And you don't realize, back in the day, a lot of things take baby steps.
mhm.
You just don't
Yeah.
even think it's possible to make such a big leap.
Mhm.
And even now, I think people benefit from baby steps taken in the past few decades by other filmmakers.
Yeah, and I wish it weren't true. I wish we could make the big leap. Everybody wishes we could make the big leap. When Brokeback Mountain came out, I thought, great, here we go. Like studio film, gay guys, mainstream stars in this movie, and it really didn't do anything. It really didn't. I mean, maybe there was more independent films and stuff, but there was, big studio gay themed films just didn't happen.
But what are
Um,
your thoughts on when one film or one filmmaker has the whole responsibility to represent everything for everyone? And if we just take a step back and say, despite what this might do, what we embrace and the breakthrough it makes, it's still one person's movie. It's just still a couple of characters' story. And what are even our expectations? Are expectations so high that a single movie can be everything?
well, I look at Nia DaCosta and the new Candyman movie,
Hmm.
which I really enjoyed. And but she had just the weight of the world on her shoulders with that film. It's so well done, so well done. And you know, and to a lot of people's credit, they looked at the film and they're like, I really enjoyed this. Here are the parts that I didn't enjoy so much, and it was like the nuanced takes. But there was also just because unfortunately her film was delayed so long, like people were just like ready, ready, ready for this film, and I can't even imagine, And then it was like microscope look at the box office and how it did, and black female horror filmmaker, and how it does in the middle of this pandemic will determine whether or not we have more, and I can't even imagine the pressure, the unfair pressure that trailblazers have to work under. That's
How
why
about
I
the
only make films for $45,000.
how about the unfair pressure now where every Hollywood horror movie has to make a political statement?
you know I think that there's sort of a there's a philosophy that all horror makes a statement anyway. Um, Whether or not we like that statement is, beside the point. That they all do. Um, you know, I'm not a fan of edicts. I'm not a fan of must-haves. I'm not a fan of, like, for this to have value, it has to do X, Y, and Z. So, if there's sort of a groundswell of, you know expectation of horror being political now, eh, I'm not on board. I take each one as they are, and I think that you like what just came out, Halloween Kills. I just watched Halloween Kills 2 nights ago, and the message of that movie is the, mob rule is bad, and it wasn't necessarily. I'm not going to trash Halloween Kills, but that aspect of the film I feel like didn't work as well because it felt sort of forced. Um, where other stuff in the film, like the nostalgia of Kyle Richards being in the movie, and she's really great in it, and just like totally delivers and is in there in service of the story as an actor, and she's not showboating. Like that part really works, and that's not about you know putting her in the film. Is about nostalgia, right, and like connecting the dots. So it can be done well if it's done well. You know, Candyman had a message. I thought it was done well. Other people disagreed. Other people with more standing disagreed with me. Um,
We're
so
also in
yeah,
an era of fan fiction, which goes to the level, this Reddit level of fans think um, they have this right to dictate what happens to their characters in a franchise or a series.
there's an ownership problem, definitely. Although I say problem, and I feel like the problem isn't that people feel ownership. I think it's the problem is that people are so can be so isolated that the thing that they can grab onto is genre films. Or I remember, I don't know if you ever were in on LiveJournal. I was on LiveJournal a million years ago, and I there was a person on LiveJournal who literally like defriended people because they didn't like Spider-Man. And you know what I mean. And that's not a problem with Spider-Man. It is a symptom of something in people, right? That they feel ownership. So I tend to be sympathetic, if not empathetic, to that sort of mindset. But it's not
As
the
a
real.
writer, doesn't it bug you, these armchair people who throw out ideas? Oh, they should do this in the next sequel, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, we can all shout out these ideas all day long, but to sit down and write a script, these people don't realize that's hard work.
Oh, right. Even like the most film for $10. Like the first feature I produced for $9,000 total, but that still needed a 90-page script. Like that effort still had to be there. Yeah, it takes 100% more effort to make a film beginning to end than it does to watch it for 2 hours and have an opinion. So, you know,
Yeah, and I think with the Marvel movies now, everyone acts like they're the head of a movie studio. It's like we're so now brought into the mechanics of film production and the film business that even casual fans, just the way they talk about film is differently. They talk more about box office and demographics, and part of me just hates that. It's like that's part of the luxury of just being a fan, is you're not weighed down by concerns of a movie studio.
yeah. Well, I blame Premiere Magazine. Premiere Magazine was the first one that really like sort of broke open the film industry from the inside. And then now, I remember when I first moved to Los Angeles, I was getting the Hollywood Reporter and Variety, mailed to me. They were daily. You got them in the mail every day, and then everybody in the studios got them. But that was like an internal, even though hundreds of thousands of people got those in Hollywood every day. Those were an internal document back then, and you
Yeah,
were getting stuff that didn't appear in Premiere Magazine for 2 more weeks. And now everybody has access. Like the Hollywood Reporter is a website that you can all just like go to and look at it and
exactly.
excavate. Yeah,
All
I
right.
don't know. I
Well,
go back and forth.
we're gonna get into some of that. Especially want to talk about your playwriting, which is so
Sure.
big. Want to talk about horror, and then I've got a few wild cards.
Okay.
Um, we will be talking about the witchcraft series.
Oh God. Okay. I think is it right? Oh yeah, it's right behind me.
I might be the only person you know that has probably seen every one of them. All what, 59?
Well,
What are they up to? 200 now?
yeah, exactly. Besides me, I have also seen all of them at this
Oh
point.
my god.
Yeah.
Okay, so here I'm on your. See, I used to write all this stuff down for my interviews, and I thought, you know what, I can just pull up a window with the person's website and just read this stuff verbatim.
Mhm.
Anyways, you have a very good bio on your website. I'm not going to read all of it, but I want,
Oh,
especially your
oh,
Fangoria fans who don't realize you have such a big background in theater, and it's not just the recent, going back. What are you getting your master's or your? So you're getting a higher degree, but when you first started, you had a background in theater as well. So I'm going to read some of that so they know this isn't just a sudden thing. This is actually part of your DNA. Okay.
okay.
Sean Abley spent the better part of the 90s in Chicago writing, directing, and producing theater for his company, the Factory Theater. Some of his long running productions include Bitches, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, the musical, Attack of the Killer Bees, and Nuclear Family. He also contributed to the ensemble created works Hooray, Second City Didn't Want Us, or Is There a Spot in the Touring Company for My Girlfriend? And P, a comedy adaptation of the P volume of the encyclopedia. Oh, you are a handful. I can only imagine the rehearsals for P.
Oh,
Okay, other commissioned and published works include The End of the World with Prom to Follow, The Adventures of Rose Red, Snow White's less famous sister, Dr. Frankincense and the Christmas Monster, Camp Kill Spree, Two-Faced, a tragedy, sort of, Princess Inchworm Measures the Ocean, Confessions of a Male Pinup, The Rise of the House of Usher, not the fall, but the rise, Dracula's Daughters, a family comedy. What else could it be?
right.
Horror High, Elevator Games, Double Trouble on the Prairie. We got to talk about that one. Dorothy and the Thief of Oz, Exposed, 8 10-minute plays about what really happened. Wish You a Merry Spendmas, not Christmas, Tortoise, V Hair, Rematch, and many more. And you actually have your scripts available. People can buy these, read them. I think you also launched your own company, Plays to Order,
Mhm.
a service to create new plays for high school and community groups based on their specific needs. Well, especially if they need a campy, fun movie based upon a B movie starring Pia Zadora.
Right.
And we'll talk more about the other stuff, but I don't want to overwhelm people. But I get excited when I hear that because I remember back in the day before you could, get a cheap video camera and make movies. I think for a lot of us creative kids who did, drama in high school and then wanted to, break out and do something special as young adults, I just have a soft spot for fringe theater. If you're lucky enough to be in a town where a playwrights festival or a new works kind of festival, and you just wanted to put on a cool play and take every drive-in movie influence you had as a kid and put it in some impossible to stage theater work. You know what I mean? Do you remember that impulse you had?
Absolutely. And I mean, that's what my theater company was built on, honestly, was, corpse grinders, aforementioned corpse grinders led to my stage adaptation of Reefer Madness, non-musical
Mhm.
version, done way before the musical version, by the way. Um,
With
and that,
Christian Campbell,
yeah, that was a musical
starring Nev
version.
Campbell's brother, Christian, which
Yes.
makes it campy to begin with, but we
Yeah.
digress.
Um, but that company, the company that did that sort of followed me from Corpse Grinders to Reefer Madness, then became the core of the Factory Theater, and our aesthetic was film styles adapted for the stage, done for $5. Right. So Santa Claus Conquers the Martian had a cast of over 20 people, which you could, I mean, never do in a theater where you're actually paying people. This was in the 90s, where Chicago storefront theater was huge. And Santa flew in, and he was like a Santa puppet on a stick that sort of flew in, and then he walked on stage, that kind of thing. And that's what we had to do, but we were all just so driven to make theater. We were all the theater kids, in our 20s making theater in Chicago, that's what we did. And I could not have been happier. I lived in the theater. I literally lived in the basement of the theater for 2 years
Oh
and was
wow.
there every single day. Yeah, like that's how we kept it going. And it was just like the most creative time I've ever had, the most fun I've ever had on stage. It was just everything that I wanted to do. And we were very lucky in that we were really popular, and our theater was like selling out every night for years and years and years. It's still going, by the way. The Factory Theater is still in Chicago, almost 30 years later, I guess. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
You
and
created a legacy.
I'm proud of that. I was there. The sort of first core group of us were there for like the first 5, 6, 7 years, and and then other people took it over and stuff, and I'm still in contact with them, and they're still doing really great work, and it's all original plays, from the ground up. And for a theater kid, I didn't realize, like, I had dreams of like being on Saturday Night Live and being in horror movies where I got to get killed, that kind of thing. I didn't realize till I got to Chicago that this other thing was possible, and I just like reveled in it.
Chicago's a tough theater town. I mean, next to New York, that's the biggest theater town in the country.
Well, and it's tough, but it's also easy. At least back then in the 90s, storefront theater was everywhere, everywhere. And you could do a show in our little 50-seat theater and get reviewed in the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times. Like, it was so supportive of theater. People would go to theater. I live in Los Angeles right now, and getting people to go to theater is like you have to trick them to get them into the theater. But yeah, it was such a fertile time for creativity. And but there were, like Steppenwolf and Second City and the Goodman, they had all these institutions there as well. Yeah, I just and I think Chicago is still a great city for theater. And I feel like if you're gonna start out, Chicago's a great place to start. And I know some people that just stay there, like they just work in Chicago. That's their thing.
Help me out because I'm drawing that blank now and I don't want to Google it. But you'll have
Okay.
to help me.
We'll have a
And
conversation.
this is like my favorite playwright. He's like the playwright equivalent to John Waters. But who wrote Mystery of Irma Vep?
Oh my gosh, that
Charles Lidlam.
Charles Bush.
Charles or no Charles Lidlam.
Charles Ludlam. I'm looking at the
Yeah,
literally looking
Ludlam. And
at
Charles
Ludlam.
Bush, who I also like, but yeah, Charles Lidlam.
Hang on one second. Hang on.
Okay.
Yeah, right here on my bookshelf are my two idols when I was a young playwright, which is
I
Charles
have that
Ludlam,
book. I have
right?
that book.
Required reading, and then
Yep.
Charles Bush, who I have had the pleasure of meeting and befriending um, over the years. But back when we did Reefer Madness, I wrote Charles Bush a letter, and just like you are my idol. I love what you do. And he was really sweet, and he sent me a handwritten letter back, just like encouraging me, and I've never forgotten that. And then years later, I got to actually tell him to his face. Um,
Very nice. See what I like about both of them? The idea of having a theater company where you work with the same group of people and month after month you're writing new materials, you're creating new characters because part of the fun is that playwright working with the same people is that that joy of creating a new character for an actor. Oh, you played the villain this last time. This time you get to be the heroine. And I think it's always fun to write for an actor that you know.
Absolutely. You know, that the factory, that's what we did. Like we had this loose ensemble eventually of about 30 people. And we would write plays for each other. And my philosophy was always I would rather work with someone who's nice than someone who is talented and mean. And
Mhm,
so we had this really great group of people, and because we were writing for each other, you know, not everybody had to be the most spectacular actor, and we had a lot of people that didn't have a lot of experience, but writing to their strengths made everybody shine on stage. And that to me was just the
mhm.
best. Like I couldn't get enough of it. And that's why like Attack of the Killer Bees and Santa Claus Carnivals and Marshes, plays like that have, you know, 20 people in them because I
Mhm.
just wanted to put everybody in the plays. We were having such a great time. So yeah,
Well,
and you know, sidebar. I just want a little tiny piece of trivia. Carl Andrus, who was a member of the Factory Theater back then, is now the director of almost every Charles Busch play.
oh wow.
Yeah, he moved to New York and met Charles and was like I think a wig tech on
Oh wow.
Springtime Canteen, and then just now is directing all the
So that's a credit. Wig tech.
shows. Yes, well, it was a show where there were a lot of wigs, so he was there wrangling
I was going to say, wouldn't that be a funner credit? Wig wrangler.
them. The implication being these wigs are out of control. Somebody needs
Wigs.
them.
The title of your next stage play. These
Wig
wigs are out of
wrangler.
control.
Yeah, wigs are out of control.
Wigs out of control. See, Charles Busch, I knew about his what was the big play he was known for? It
Vampire
was
lesbian autumn.
yes. Because I remember back in the day hearing about it, but I don't think before they started making movies based on some of his stuff, and just that yearning of why can't I see a production of this? That was like the back in the day when now you could probably go to YouTube and see
Hmm.
some regional, live stage production of it. It's just
Yeah.
these things became mythic after a while. Go, oh, why can't I see this? I have to go to New York or off Broadway. But the my first, I think, real Charles Busch was the novel he wrote, The Horrors
Uh,
of Lost Atlantis.
yeah.
And the whole kind of plot was how he puts together his own theater troupe that puts on plays kind of like what
Mhm.
he put on,
Right.
except he had other titles. But I thought he captured indie theater so well. The people you work with, the good, the bad, the just crazed people, performance art. And when I think back to those days, for me in the 80s and 90s, I'd kill to go back to that and see just
Mhm.
a really bad but ambitious original one act play. Remember when people would just do that? They didn't care about the money, they didn't care that they had no budget, and you would actually see some really creative people.
Well, you know, I'm a student of off Broadway. It fascinates me the history of that, and I've actually had the pleasure of meeting Robert Patrick, um, uh,
From
who wrote
Terminator 2?
yeah, the other one, uh, who wrote Kennedy's Children, right? Robert
Oh.
Patrick, and who was one of the originators of Off Broadway, and I've gotten to study with Bob Moss, who was also one of the people who started Off Broadway, and it was certainly our aesthetic when we started the Factory Theater. Like I remember reading about La Mama and reading about how uh, Ellen Stewart would literally like make food for the actors, you know, because they were all starving. And I said to one of my people that was we were founding the factory, like, I love this. I want to be a person who does that. And he's like, we're not making soup for the actors. But yeah, it is. I'm the thought of like something like Vampire Lesbians, which I actually got to be in eventually, in a production in Chicago.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, but the idea that in New York back then that Charles could wrangle together what he needed to put that show up, and then it would become the longest running show in off Broadway history at the time. is I, I I feel like that era is sort of gone, right? I think the stakes are a little
Mhm.
higher now, and it's just a little harder. Um,
You're right about the stakes being higher. That there's something about theater created by people when they're young and have nothing to lose,
hmm
and you're living in some crappy studio apartment, maybe with roommates. You
hmm
all have, minimum wage jobs, and your whole life is living and breathing your show. And there is a
hmm
certain passion that once you've become established and you have to guarantee box office, whoever's funding you can't take a big risk. You
hmm
just can't duplicate that after you're successful.
No, I mean when we did the Factory Theater, our rent on the space was $600 a month, and I was living in the space, and so I was maintaining it and not having to pay rent, but contributing to that, and we could put up a show that failed. Like we could just, and we had a few in the early days that were just like were complete bombs, but we were all doing it because we wanted to do it. Like we weren't doing it to get paid. I remember we had huge meetings when we finally sort of officially came up with a board for the Factory Theater. Like we should pay the actors. How can we work? And but then there was like pushback to that because like once we start paying the actors, then it becomes a different thing. And actors should be paid. I don't want to say say that, but
It's kind of like the story of the Cockettes that
yeah.
started organically, and
Mhm,
suddenly they were discovered. They brought them to New York,
mhm.
which was kind of the beginning of the end. Some things
Right.
you don't want to put in a bottle or put a label on them. You just want them to stay as they are. Not
Yeah.
everything has to be bigger.
And that Coquette's New York transfer legendarily disastrous, right? Like it
Yeah.
it just super failed. Yeah, I mean I want, at this playwriting retreat, we were all sitting around talking, and I said I don't want a play on Broadway. Like, and not that that's not that I'm gonna have to turn that down anytime soon. But I've been to Broadway theaters, and they're gigantic. And if you're seeing a drama and you have the cheap seats, you can't even see the actors. Like that's not what theater is to me. I don't want to have a play in a theater where because you're poor you can't see the performance. Like that is so. I want there I want theater like that to remain. I want like small, indie, inexpensive theater to exist because for some that's the only theater they'll ever see, and I think it's important that people see theater. That's one of the things that we did at the factory is our ticket prices were $5 for like 4 years, and then another discussion we raised it to seven. Like that was like a big, like what are we doing? Um, and I miss that. I hope it still exists out there. I'm in Los Angeles right now, so the theater scene is very different. But I just I don't know.
What was your relationship like with your audience? Because to make something like that work, you build an audience that wants to come see whatever you put on. It's not like this fickle public looking at the title, but when you have a dedicated audience that is there for you, the troupe, they'll come to see everything.
Well, we would hang out with our audience, and that's actually kind of how we got some of our members over the years. Is that we would do the show, and then we would go to either Simon's Bar or Ginger's or any of the L&L Tavern, like any of the divey bars of Chicago in the
Mhm.
'90s, and our audience would follow us. And so, yeah, we had a pretty decent relationship with a certain faction of our audience socially. We would see them,
Because I
and then
bet
we
a
would do
lot of them.
shows
Well,
in
did they
ours.
realize this was the only place they could get this? You can't really duplicate what you did. Did they realize how unique this was?
I don't know. I think we might have gotten a lot of people because of the kind of theater we did. Like the bait was, we're doing, Reefer Madness on stage. Oh, that's a movie I've heard of. Get them in. And then, give them what we gave them. And then now they enjoy theater for
Mhm.
whatever reason. And then they stick with us. So I think I mean, again, Chicago's a theater town, so people enjoy theater. So people just go. They take a chance on theater. Um,
Mhm.
but definitely, I think that our theater, certainly the Annoyance Theater, um, in Chicago, which was they were much bigger than us, still much bigger than us. Um, they were we were both doing sort of the same kind of stuff. Um, Certainly, I think cultivated an audience that maybe was not were not theater goers previous to seeing our show.
Sure. So you probably opened up theater to people who maybe before that would just go to movies, and now you
I
ease
think
them
very
into live theater.
yeah.
Well, here's something which, looking back, it is probably problematic.
Okay.
But I think it's more of loving John Waters and just the whole thing of loving things that are bad.
Hmm.
And I remember, remember when that book came out, Bad Movies We Love?
Hmm.
And I remember I loved that book, but at the same time, I thought, I don't think they're bad. I just like them. I think they're entertaining. I can see why people call them bad. And this
Hmm.
whole idea of guilty pleasures, most of the time, I just think they're pleasures. I can see why people call them guilty. But I've come to the conclusion of if it entertains, it entertains. I don't feel a need to feel superior to something like when Showgirls first came out, I knew it was going to be a camp classic. I said this is fun. I didn't need 10 years to go by and some hipster to tell me it was okay to like it now. You know? But
Yeah.
here's my perverse little thing is I like bad theater. Like I
Hmm.
like going to, amateur theater cuz theater's hard. Or maybe it's like, a high school production or just some bad community theater. Or my favorite was senior citizen theater. Like I
Hmm.
remember this theater group where everyone was a senior.
Yeah.
Very hit and miss, like a collection of little one act shorts and things. But even if I was kind of having that perverse joy of seeing something bad, I
Hmm.
never looked down on them. You still don't, think you're superior, but at the same time, there's this perverse fascination
Hmm.
of seeing something that doesn't quite hit the mark.
Yeah. I grew up in a community theater, so I have a lot of affection for community theaters and high school theaters, and I love those senior theater troops. I just think that's genius. Um,
Hmm.
and I've written a couple of things for those as well. You know, I this is I know that I'm an island on what I'm about to say, and most people disagree with me, but it's the reason why I don't like Waiting for Guffman,
Hmm.
because whereas I love Best in Show, you can tell they love their characters. They have such affection for their characters. Waiting for Guffman, I feel like they all feel above their characters and they feel above the experience of community theater. And so I just don't find it funny. I feel like they're mocking those people. And I just do I just don't do that. That's just not me. Um
That's a
I
good
feel like
comparison. I know what you mean because it's that tone. I think
mhm,
like part of it is like you see a high school play, and then obviously teenagers are playing adult characters. There's
right.
always some built-in kind of fascination. Can they pull it off? It's like we're all agreeing that this doesn't work, but they really
Mhm,
don't have an alternative, so we go along with it.
right.
It's
It's
kind
our
of like
suspension.
the
I was gonna
suspension
say,
of disbelief. Yeah.
yeah.
Or you've got a big musical, but you just don't have enough good singers in the high school, but you take what you got.
Mhm,
They muddle through it. And I think part of it is I'm I like the ingenuity, but at the
mhm.
same time, it's like you're on the edge of your seat saying, "Oh my God, when are they going to drop off the cliff?"
It's one of those things where it's like so nerve-wracking to be in the audience. Um I I wrote a musical that I I'm not going to give you all the mechanics of how this came to be, but I was hired to workshop at a small university here in California. And I went in thinking I'm going to workshop this musical and get it into shape. And when I got there, and sort of before I got there, I got this inkling, oh, that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is they have a small drama department, and they've cast this musical with who's available, many of whom had never been in a musical before. So now what I'm doing is I'm teaching people how to be in a musical. And
Mhm.
that experience, and it was like, I'm not getting them, like, I'm not getting these performances to like Broadway quality. I'm getting these actors to give me the best they are capable of. And so that changed my perspective on that, right? And so when I saw these actors, and not all of them like nailed it in a way that you would expect it to be nailed in professional theater, but when I saw them like grow and like get to where they could get, like
Mhm.
I was not on the edge of my seat scared in the audience. I was like beaming and so happy and just like filled with joy watching it happen. So I I look at that, if I, I empathize with people in a bad show, but I because I've certainly been in them, and I've certainly like had times on stage where I was terrible and knew it, and knew that I wasn't like hitting the mark in the right way. But I just am such a cheerleader for that experience, because I also think, for every person on that stage, there's 10 people in the audience that would never step on that stage, right? Like, that see that happening and think, oh God, no, no, I'd rather die. Like, that would be terrible. So yeah, I look at it like a, and my perspective has changed over the years. I'm 55, so I think I may have softened a bit over the years, and like, um, been a little, and have become more charitable in sort of my assessment of those things.
Oh, sure. And I think part of it is if you have been in theater, you do have that empathy. I think that's what adds to the suspense of you just, you know, more of the pitfalls. So you're
Right.
just kind of, holding your breath, seeing, can they do it? Are they going to, fall flat? But in spite of it, I think it's kind of like when you see like people in Hollywood trying to recreate that, like you said, waiting for Guffman, when it's so self aware, I'd rather see an amateur fail and be interesting than a professional act smug and superior. It's kind of like what you were saying, you'd rather work with a pleasant, amateur than some smug professional.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whole thing of, I get so turned off by people who can't appreciate campiness or low budgetness. It's that lack of ability to laugh at yourself. And I
Mm-hmm.
think maybe seeing amateur theater kind of resets you, makes you not take everything so seriously, and kind of gets you reacquainted with unexpected, I think, production value. What is actually interesting about people and characters?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I see also is just pure passion.
Mhm.
Like, you know, creating art in any way is driven by passion. And when you're doing it, you're confessing. Like, any art that you create is basically you confessing, right? You're like
Mhm.
sharing your truth with the world. It's unavoidable. You can't not. Even if you tried to, if you like tried to create art where it's like, this is not me, you're telling your truth, but that is, not you. And so yeah, I mean, that's what I take away from it, honestly. And again, that's, I've, and as I've gotten older, I've become an educator, and I've become a dramaturg, and I've, become a person who, an arts advocate. And so my perspective is very much like, this is a thing that you need to live. And how can we how can we work together to make sure you have as much of that as possible?
So if you were a specialist on the history of wigs in the theater, would you be a wigaturg?
A wigaturg. Yeah, and thank you for doing the hard G. A lot of people say dramaturge, dramaturg, a wigaturg. Or you'd be like a, a folliculist.
That sounds obscene.
That does sound obscene. It also sounds a little bit more clinical, right?
A little
Folliculist.
more clinical. I'm going to ask you in depth about one of your plays, but first, I need your to wrap up this
Mm-hmm.
odd fascination. I want your take on this. I went through this period of the '80s.
Mm-hmm.
I was obsessed with like small town beauty pageants.
Mm-hmm.
Because in beauty pageants, there's always like a talent thing. And when you
Right.
do the small town, it's usually sponsored by some weird group,
Hmm.
like not like the Rotary Club, but even more specific and bizarre,
Hmm.
with the pretext of representing the town and whatnot. But it was just fascinating because I think some of the girls, this was just something for their resume. They did it for fun. Then they go off to college.
Right.
Maybe the others were pretty and thought they could be a model or something. But there was always one or two in these pageants where you could tell they're in this small town. They hate their life. They hate their parents, or they just see this as their ticket out of the small town. And
Hmm.
they think that somehow this pageant is going to bring them to Hollywood. Of course, how could it? We all know, of course, it won't. Even if you win it, you'll
Hmm.
end up becoming a housewife and have kids in a couple years, and their whole life is set out. You're from Montana. You
Yeah.
know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
And I just love this real life pathos of someone who thinks this pageant is her ticket out of this town. And it's almost like, I don't know, this should be like a movie with Karen Black, back in the early 70s. This is like, you know, eh, something
Well,
that's kind of light and, yeah,
there was Smile.
Smile, something like that, yeah. Except even more tragic, like Smile meets They Shoot Horses, Don't They? That starts
That-
out light, but then becomes so tragic. And I don't
yeah.
know why I'm drawn to that. And I think it just talks about stardom in general. Some people keep it in perspective. This is a fun thing I can look back on 20 years from now. When for another contestant, they're betting everything on this. And if they don't have this, their life is over.
It's sort of Drop Dead Gorgeous, although that's a
Yeah.
comedy, a little bit. Yeah, I. It's interesting because one of my early uh, collaborators and still very close friend, and I just talked to her the other day, Amy Seeley, comes from a pageant background in that her mother did hair for pageants forever, and she was in one as a
Okay.
young person, and so we've talked about them for years and years and years. I think where my interest in pageant lies is in Asia, where pageants are a legitimate career path. If you look
Mhm.
into the background of a lot of famous Asian actresses, you'll find pageantry in them. In fact, I believe like Michelle Yeoh, I believe, I think I'm getting my history right. One of
Mhm.
our at least American, most recognized in American Asian actors has a pageant background.
Okay.
So it's just interesting how like different, you know, there, it's beauty but also talent and whatever. Here, if you're in a pageant, it's almost a mark against you in
Hmm.
some way. You really have to sort
Right.
of, it may open some doors, but you will forever have to fight. I think that like they were in a pageant thing. I could be wrong about that. Also, pageants have really changed, right? Like it is, you know, some of them get rid of the swimsuit thing, and some of them have gotten rid of like having to wear high heels and stuff like that. And it's about scholarships now, which is great. So,
I know it's not a pageant, it's a scholarship contest. Yeah.
well, I
Well,
think
I
the
think the
women
other
who have scholarships would agree with that because they're some of them are pretty hefty scholarships.
Well, the other thing is, I love the talent competition, and in a small town, okay, the go-to, you sing a Whitney Houston song, you do something, that's not going to offend anyone. You play the piano. Occasionally there's a wild card, you twirl a baton, but I love it. Then you get this person that just something out of left field, and the parents and the audience don't know how to react. Like you read some subversive poem or you do some weird performance art piece and you're just nervous for them because you think the crowd's going to turn on them for, how dare you do something out of the norm. And then I'm thinking, okay, if this girl doesn't win the pageant, she's still going to do something interesting with her life. Although probably have a string of really rotten boyfriends, probably bop around, city to city, not finding herself until she's 40. But You just while you're watching this, you can predict the whole next 40 years of
Wow,
this girl's life.
y- you've really you've really got this young lady mapped out.
But I think maybe that's, the writer in us. I think for me, that's what inspires me to think of characters and things. And I think maybe that's why I like to seek out underground and fringe,
Mhm,
because it shakes you up. It makes it so life isn't so predictable.
mhm.
I
Yeah,
know. What
I
about
mean,
you?
what part of that? Again, I always look at it from like, you set foot on that stage, you win.
Hmm.
There's definitely, I think, better choices for that context. I've certainly seen like dramatic readings, which I feel
Hmm.
like in a pageant is I'm not sure your audience is ready to receive that, because of what's happening in this pageant. Um, I don't know. I have pageants as like a source of camp haven't really landed for me in that way. I find them fascinating, and there was certainly a period of my life where the Miss America pageant was required viewing. Um, I do
But it's
remember
only
that.
small. But it's only small town. Because I remember during that era, then going to bigger ones, like the one that led right before the state competition, which leads to Miss America.
Uh,
The minute they started to get good, they were boring. You lost all interest. Like when I finally got to the one where the woman was singing to a background tape of, What a Feeling theme from Flashdance. I thought, the minute they start singing Flashdance, I think that's my cutoff.
you're done. Interesting. The one sort of pageant thing in my head, I think it was 1971. Miss Montana was disqualified from the Miss America pageant for flashing the peace sign.
What? That's
Yep,
crazy.
yep.
What year was this? Like the 80s,
I think it
90s?
was 1971. I think it was during the Vietnam War.
Oh, so it seemed like a war protest?
Well, it was just like she flashed the peace sign, which was back then was this. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
Well, the other thing I think by the early 2000s when karaoke really hit, I think I transferred my fascination to that because I think that was also where dreams, come to flourish and then die. Because
yeah.
there's a lot of people who just go to karaoke for fun, but then you got the people that think they really want to be a professional singer and this is practical experience for them. But even for them, it's just going to live and die right here at karaoke.
Here's the thing: I will get on stage. I've been nude on stage. I've done
What?
drag. I've like done like I have will run to a stage. I've been in musicals. I've sung all of that. I've done stand up. I've done stand up in gay bars where there's like porn playing behind me. Like I will run to a stage to do whatever, even to this day, even though I'm more of a writer than an actor now. I cannot do karaoke. It
Yeah.
terrifies me. And I don't know why I've got this mental block. I and I imagine doing it. Like I have fantasies about like getting up there and doing exactly that and like nailing it. Everybody's attention is like on me. And I cannot do it. And I don't know why. So when I see karaoke, I'm actually just uncomfortable because I am judging myself. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm like, somebody's going to make me get up there and do it. Somebody's going to try to convince me to do it. I could never do it. So
Mhm.
it doesn't matter if they're nailing it. I am, I am in my own head, like castigating myself for my cowardice and instead of like
Mhm.
assessing their performance.
It's surreal. Because I've bombed at karaoke, and it's like walking through fire. If you can survive bombing at karaoke, you can pretty much survive anything. But
Yeah.
the worst part is when you know you're bombing in the middle of it, as opposed to someone who has no clue how bad they are,
Mhm.
and knowing you're bad and knowing I gotta see this through to the end. But it's that character building thing. So even if you're doing bad theater, the fact you follow through, You're always going to get something out of it. And as an audience member, even in the worst live shows I've seen, I can always find something that I like about it.
Yeah, I am. Well, along that line, I've never walked out of a play. I'm sort of combing my brain to see if I'm telling the truth on that one. Yeah, I've only walked out of two movies in my life. I am there for the experience, you know, good or bad. So and yeah, I would say there's been very few times that I've walked out of something where I've just been like, ugh, you know, I regret being there.
Do you remember Death Becomes Her, the movie?
Yeah,
You know, at the beginning, the musical within the movie with Meryl Streep, a songbird based on Sweet Bird of Youth,
yeah.
and it kind of opens the movie. I love that. It's hard to create something bad on purpose, and I
Well,
just get titillated by watching that.
yeah, I think it takes a deft hand to create something that is supposed to be perceived as not good. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people think they know how to do that, um, and it feels disingenuous, and the comedy falls flat if people
Mhm.
don't know how to do it. People throw around the word camp all the time, and it's sort of their, oh, it's going to be camp, it's going to be camp, camp, camp. No, camp is a style, and it requires knowledge of how to do it correctly. Otherwise, it's just not funny.
Tell me, please agree with me on this. I hate it when people say, "Oh, it's like John Waters." And it isn't, and people just use that as a catch-all. Or
Mhm.
if something's really bad, that's the crutch. Oh, but it's meant to be like John Waters. Well, no, John Waters was very clever and funny. He got the tone right. And these people who are not John Waters, they get the tone all wrong. And for number one, just having drag queens in your movie doesn't automatically make it like John Waters,
Right.
because they don't get the thing that Divine was just playing these characters. Divine wasn't appearing as a drag queen. Divine was Dawn Davenport and all these characters.
Yeah. No, John Waters movies are actually really skillful. Like
Hmm.
the people get caught up on the titles and the subject matter, but I was just rewatching Desperate Living the other day, and that script is genius.
Yeah.
His ear for dialogue is unmatched, and that's a person who I don't know. I don't want to supposed to speak for John Waters, but I don't. I've read his books. I've read everything he's done, and I've seen everything that he's made, and um, he took it very seriously.
Hmm.
He what he was creating. It was just his aesthetic was that, and he took it very seriously. And filth was his genre, and
Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's a lazy comparison of people like just sort of point to John Waters as like, I mean, John Waters is trash cinema made to be trash cinema. It's not trash
Hmm.
cinema because it suffers some sort of
Hmm.
um, quality, lesser quality situation. It is a using every resource they had, making the choices they made in an
Because
artistic
they
way.
were all coherent movies. There's cause and effect storytelling. And I just love how talk about motivated characters. His characters are always just hyper driven.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I just again his aesthetic is so fun and um but it's like if you've read his books, you know that like on set he can be a bit of a taskmaster, right? Or at least at some
Hmm.
point he. So yeah,
Well, that's the other thing is when people see that, they think, oh, they just winged it, they improvised. And he's the total opposite of that. You don't change his words. You don't.
no, it's all word perfect. Like if
Yeah.
he's got some scripts out there published, and I've bought a few, at conventions where I probably shouldn't have bought them, and yeah, they're word perfect.
Of course, working with Edie,
Yeah,
who was not good at getting all the words in the right order,
right.
and just
She
hearing
did.
how he worked with her.
Yeah. Well, I look at her like I look at like Roseanne and Jerry Seinfeld. Those three people, none of them genius actors, but the people working with them created a style that supported what they could do, and and did it deftly, and it was wildly popular.
Yeah.
I look at Edie in Desperate Living, and John, figured out a way to make her perfect. Perfect. I mean, she's the like who else could play that Queen Carlotta role in that movie? Um,
I
so
think
yeah,
so much of that was payback for her. She was so demeaned in her early roles. The egg lady. This time
right,
you're going to be a queen, Edie, or especially in polyester when she got to be, this the
Cuddles, right?
nouveau riche lady.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. He's a person we're talking, back at the beginning of this conversation about like changes. Like he now goes on the books and says that he regrets glorifying like Tex Watson and the other like Manson
Manson
family
family.
and taking
Yeah.
it, less seriously than he should have back then. But again, the folly of youth. Like, I don't blame him for that, but I love the fact that he's like, you know what? Upon further review, that was possibly not the best choice.
See, obviously you could write a whole book about this, and I think for now there's a seal on John Waters.
In what way?
Once people start to break that seal, you're opening a gigantic can of worms.
You mean
That
like
that
examining his past work with the eye of today?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And you know
well,
what? Maybe it's okay just to leave that on the side for now, because I think it'll take some very discerning minds to,
yeah,
if you want to think of something of its time, because he was, even a little older. He came of age during the 50s and 60s, and so I think for him, he had even other influences, and his he was consciously breaking taboos, but he was also referencing things. I think it'd be a big mistake to dig too deeply into him at this point, because I think he did it in a way that opens so many doors for gay filmmakers, for just people who were out of the mainstream. And I think it would be such low hanging fruit to start criticizing everything he did, because I don't think his intent was at all bad.
well, and also, I mean, what could you point to in his movies that would be like he's not do like I can't think of like racial stereotypes or you know bad gay stereotypes. Like I can't think of
I've accidentally stumbled on message boards. I've seen him raked over the coals by college students and people who see him totally removed from that original context,
right,
who want to cancel him. It's
right.
like, what?
Well, I think he's uncancelable because he has been above board with everything he's done. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's all well documented what his intentions were, and if they were like if it's stuff that doesn't stand up to scrutiny today, he was already addressing that back then, and you know,
You know what he gets some of the biggest flack for is the chicken scene.
killing a chicken. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
People
and
are
here's the
more
thing,
upset about that than almost anything.
and I won't. You know what? Here's the thing, and I won't defend him over that. Right? Like, if
Yeah.
you feel that that is, like there's Cannibal Holocaust. Is that
Right.
the one where they
I just thought of that. Yeah.
is that the one where they kill the turtle? I'm trying. All those cannibal
Yeah.
movies sort of blend together
Yeah.
for me.
Cannibal Holocaust. There's a real life killing. Yeah.
And of a turtle, of an animal.
Of a turtle.
And I won't defend that. I mean, I'll defend the film, but I won't defend because that, I would never do that. I think it's disgusting, and um, you know, there's other movies that have done that. There's like westerns that have killed like buffalo and
But
stuff like that.
But John Waters does come back and say, "Well, they did eat the chicken after." So,
which I which I feel like, quite frankly, is a lie. But
oh,
I because if you really think about what that takes, like, so you're just this random kids like get a chicken and you kill it on set. Now you've got to like pluck the
pluck it
chicken, you've got to debone the chicken, you've got to like take all the guts out. Like, I don't think they ate the chicken later, but I feel like that's
is
that's like who's gonna
rewriting
question?
history. See,
Yeah,
I was pictured them in the back of the trailer with some big oil drum and some crude fire, and they got the chicken on a stick, and they're probably burning the feathers off. Who
Having grown
knows?
up in Montana, where I've seen what it takes to go from a living animal to a dead animal on your plate, I can tell you it's probably not accomplishable on a film set.
Oh my god! I've seen bulls being castrated on the farm, so
I have I have done that. I have participated in that.
those little
Yeah.
heavy duty rubber bands, and oh my god.
Yeah, and then what happened? So because my family, I have not my nuclear family, but my extended family, ranching family. That's a day that all the families gather together, and you do that, and you cut them off, and you send them back up to the house, and they are cooked, and you eat them. They're Rocky Mountain oysters. I've had them. Yeah.
Oh my god. Montana. I'll tell you some Montana stories sometime. But the one thing, I mean, we could talk about a lot of your stuff. I don't know why, but the one that really pops out, Confessions of a Male Pinup. And I just remember, like in underground theater, yeah, every now and then you'd always see something with some overtly kind of sexy sounding, format, male pinup, or the whole genre of behind the scenes of a porno movie kind of thing.
uh
And that always sounds fun on paper, but I don't know why it's this weird little genre that's really hard to pull off. It always ends up not being that sexy or as
Right.
funny or as interesting. You know what I mean? And I'm sure yours was really good, but there's just always this whole thing of a lot of times they think the subject matter is everything
Right.
except the script is the afterthought.
Well, I'll tell you, it wasn't great. That was actually a collaboration with a friend of mine, Rick Beach, and
Okay.
he wanted to do a one man show, and Rick was an actor. He had a great body. This was back in Chicago, my Chicago days, and I cast him in a couple things where he had to be naked. He was like totally willing to be naked on stage. He totally was willing to be exploited in that way. He was a great guy, and so then and he was like had been doing some photo shoots and stuff like that. So he's like, I want to do a one man show that sort of takes apart this hot gay guy thing. And so we worked on it for a long time. And really just like leaned into it, and it just ultimately, I don't know, it just didn't completely work. Um, I think he would say that too. Um,
Do you think it's because it's hard to have the audience have sympathy for a beautiful person? As opposed to, see, we like the Dorothy Stratton story. We like to see the fall of beautiful people and a tragic ending.
right.
But it's hard to have sympathy for when you're beautiful, people love you. Where do you go from there?
Yeah. And I wish I could remember more about the show, but what we were really trying to do was like there was a scene I remember. It's like, I'm going to show you what I do several times a week while I'm naked at home. The lights come up and he's vacuuming naked. Like that was the kind of stuff that we were doing with this show, just sort of taking the piss out of, him and the audience's expectations of a naked show. Because the other thing that was that was happening at the time was there was a lot of naked gay theater happening in Chicago and sort of nationwide. It was sort of
Hmm.
the era of like naked gay theater. Um, Jerker was a big show, which we also
Hmm.
did and there, and um, every it seemed like every gay play had to have nudity in it, and he was in all of them. So that was what we were. That was
So,
the
what do you think?
context we created it.
See, the whole nudity on stage, maybe in that context, it's a little easier. It's really, I think, hard when you see, a big professional play like, regional theater, a real, you know, legit movie, a theater company. And as broad minded as people are, there's always this discomfort when you have a naked man on stage, or like a ballet company that'll do something nude, or, I've even seen on YouTube nude opera.
Hmm.
And there's no way to make it not uncomfortable for people. But if you
Right.
had comedy, maybe that lessens it a bit. But then at a certain point, you just get a lot of nervous laughter.
Did you ever see a show called Party? It
No.
started in Chicago. David Dillon wrote it, and it was a the setup was it's a bunch of gay guys that get together and they're going to play a game that's basically truth or dare, but it has a different name. There's different rules. And the stakes of the game is, you take off a piece of clothing. If this happens, then you have to take off a piece of clothing. And within like 15 minutes in the show, the cast is completely naked. But the show is 90 minutes long. And so it's just like gay guys hanging out naked at this party, and they're talking. It's one of those, like, everybody's in a room together and they start talking and people start baring their souls, and that kind of hugely popular.
Hmm.
Ran for years and years and years in Chicago. There was productions all over the country, and I think that show actually figured out how to do it, which was like, get them naked soon, keep them
Hmm.
naked for so long that eventually your attention is elsewhere. um,
Okay.
so yeah, kudos to David Dillon, because that was
Oh, good.
that sort of changed the face of Chicago theater too. That was a money printing machine, and eventually it was like bridal parties. You know what I mean? It was like bridal showers coming to see the show. The blue hair crowd came too. So
Like, what do you think of the genre of putting like a porn star into a stage play that'll have some nude scene? Like remember Ryan Idle was in something.
like Jeff Stryker in Hard
Jeff
Times,
Striker.
written by Bruce
Yeah.
Valanche, I believe. Well, I did a gay porn on stage. I adapted Joe Gage's "L.A. Tool and Die" here in
Oh, I
Los
saw
Angeles.
that on your site. Yeah, and how did that
And
how did that work? Did it?
Well, I got the rights. I found Joe Gage and got the rights, licensed the rights to the show, and he was more than happy to do that. And I made it a comedy, and the the context was like masculine man, like it was all about masculine men, even though Joe wasn't necessarily like reacting to anything with his cast. It was just like what was popular at the time, but I put it in the context of like we all must be masculine. And
Did you
I
expand from the original porn movie? Was there
a,
extra scenes, extra dialogue?
a bit, yeah, there was. I transcribed the movie, and then I added some scenes, and I expanded some scenes, and I cut some stuff, and I tied it all together because the plot of that film was a little meandering. But what I found a group of 8 actors that were all willing to be naked on stage, and we simulated sex, and there was no erections, and nobody could touch their penis because that would be sort of veering into like arrestable territory. But yeah, I just managed to work it out, and it was they were clothes came on and off constantly, constantly, constantly. But the comedy was the thing that carried it. Like, people laughed all night long, and it was,
So it
again,
got a good
money.
reaction.
Yeah,
So it got a
yeah.
good reaction. What was
Yeah,
it like when you approach Joe Gage for the rights? How do you negotiate rights to a porn script?
I think he was so like surprised that there was more value to be gotten out of that script. Yeah, I just told him what I wanted to do, and showed him my past work, because I've adapted a lot of films. I've done a lot of adaptations, and I just showed him my past work and said, this is what I want to do with it. And it'll be absolutely respectful, and but also funny. And he was on board. Yeah, it was really easy. In fact, I was going to negotiate all three of there's a trilogy of those films, and I was going to negotiate all three, but I just sort of moved on to other things after that production. But it was
Did
it
did
was
he show
close.
up for some of the performances?
He didn't, but his because he's on the East Coast, but his producing partner did, from back then, did who was he died recently. The producing partner, he was a casting director here in Los Angeles, under a different name, and he came and saw it, and he was the one who was like, it's interesting because we weren't playing up like these guys were more masculine than anybody else. We were just casting who was, just doing what was the look of the time. So yeah, he liked it though.
I want to get into your current playwriting program,
Okay.
but my question leading up to it, and a lot of us, creators who have done different things, the theater kids who thought they were going to take on Broadway or Hollywood, and but actually ended up having interesting paths anyway, because one thing you discover is not just one path. It's not like you're either Quentin Tarantino or nothing, or your Tennessee Williams or nothing. There's a lot of other careers that are satisfying, like a Charles Ludlam you discover, or a Charles Bush, and lots of other things too. But I think what's really hard is until you've had a breakthrough brand name household hit, and casual people, you say, oh, I'm a playwright, I'm a movie maker, oh, what have you done? And if middle America doesn't instantly recognize it, for a lot of people it's like, oh, I haven't made it yet. But the reality is you have made it. So how do you gauge your success when so many people have this other gauge, you know and what are the things that you think you will be most remembered for?
Huh. Uh, it's interesting. I mean, you're always wanting more. Like if you're a creative person and you're in it to like do it for the rest of your life, you're always looking for like bigger things to happen and more financial reward, that kind of thing. But honestly, just getting it done for me, like every time I finish a script, I like turn a cartwheel. Like if I'm writing something, because I'm just like it is so laborious to finish that. I look at the factory theater still being around 29 years later, and I look at that as my success. Like I helped create the foundation of something that lasts and serves people.
Mhm.
And for me lately, I've sort of wrapped my arts advocacy into my arts practice, and so being able to like uplift other people or be a dramaturg for other people, that to me feels really satisfying. So I guess my success is measured in the satisfaction I feel each time something happens, and if I don't feel satisfied with it, then I don't consider it a success. Um,
Mhm.
and that like right now, I'm having a nice little run writing for Fangoria. I've had something in the past couple issues and stuff on the website. I've been writing for them since 2009, off and on, like big chunks of time when I wasn't, but other times when I was. And I actually thought the other day, I'm like, I'm actually doing okay in that way. And I'm not pursuing other magazines right now. I'm not pursuing other journalistic work. I'm just working on my own stuff. So I don't know. I guess I have a desire for, I would love to have one of my plays open off Broadway and have a decent run. That to me would be like a great success. And if anything higher than that, I don't really aspire to. But in the meantime, just doing the work. Like I love writing so much. I literally love doing it. As soon as we're done here, I'm gonna like close up my laptop. I'm gonna head out to the cafe and I'm gonna write for the rest of the day. Like that is, I wrote all weekend. My husband was out of town, and he's like, "Get out of the house, honey. Make sure you get out of the house." And all I did was like
Mhm.
write all weekend. Like it is so. For me, success is still having the privilege of being able to create something, regardless of whether or not it somehow goes on.
And you let history decide how it's perceived.
I think what I'll be most remembered for is the factory theater. I think that, like
Mhm.
in the grand scheme of things, that'll be like the thing. Sean Abley, may he rest in peace, founder of the factory theater. Um, but there's some stuff that's happening now that may change that. That may be, like there's. It just really depends on what you're looking at. Like I wrote for a Disney show called So Weird, and there are people that worship that show. And so when people find out that I wrote on that show, I've met people that grew up on that show, they like lose their minds, and and so that feels like, you know,
But
a
there's some
part.
people who would look at just your movie and TV output and think, oh my goodness, for some people just to have any screenplay produced or to write for any established show would be a really big deal for them.
And I honor that. Like I'm excited. I look at my IMDb, and I haven't like added anything new to it for a while because I've been doing mostly theater stuff, but I look at that, I'm like, there are people that would kill for these credits.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
I
speaking of, I'm going
yeah.
to read a couple things off. See, I'm weaving it in rather than
Okay.
dumping it all at once. I
Great.
can't believe I've done that. But I love that you went to a University of Montana in Missoula
Yep.
trauma department. You went to other schools, but I love that there because I've been to Missoula. I like Missoula.
It's a great city.
Great city, but let me just step ahead because we're going to talk about playwriting as and then wrap things up. But I just want people to get a little taste of your film credits.
God.
And again, for people who have never seen this, the Witchcraft series, which was, I
Oh,
believe, were they
yeah.
all direct to video? I don't think even number one played theaters.
Yeah,
This was
no,
like
they're
a
all
horror series, kind of an erotic horror series created for the home video market.
yeah.
So, Big Long Legacy, you wrote Witchcraft 15, Blood Rose, and Witchcraft 16, Hollywood Coven. Were those like filmed back to back in the same weekend?
Well, I'll tell you, I also worked on the story uncredited for Witchcraft 14, Angel of Death, and came up with that title too. They all three, so I revised that script and then I wrote 15 and 16, and they were written to all three be shot over 9 days. And that's how they that's what
The
they did.
series, weren't they kind of known for shooting them quickly?
Oh yeah. No, they're super low budget. Yeah.
Hmm. And that same company, you wrote a film for them called Ebola.
Which is yet to be produced, sadly. It was, yeah, I wrote Ebola for them when Ebola was big. They wanted to do an Ebola movie, so I wrote Ebola, and I also wrote for them one of the Camp Bloods.
Hmm.
Um, they do Camp Blood, Bride of Blood, which is also yet to be shot.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, do you get paid for these whether or not they're produced?
yeah, I did. Yeah.
That's nice.
I'm not
See?
going to tell you how much because it is embarrassingly low. Normally, I do tell these things. Like, I'm happy to tell, like, we made Socket for $45,000, but it's embarrassingly low what you get paid for these things.
So, Socket was TLA Releasing was part of that.
Yeah, they picked it up.
They picked it up, and
Uh,
Velvet Candy Entertainment was part of
yes,
that.
those are my
And you
producing
also,
credits.
okay, you wrote for them something called Wildcat Road.
So, Wildcat Road is a gay Russ Meyer flick. It's about
Ah,
three male strippers who accidentally kill their boss and then have to go on the run. We did a reading of it in Los Angeles years ago, and it was a big hit. And but that was right when the financial crisis hit, like in the 2000, like eight nine era. So
mhm.
independent film just sort of died on the vine for a couple years, and it never got made. But I hold out hope.
Hold out hope. You know, I met Russ Meyer. I actually interviewed him once.
Oh wow, that's cool.
I'll have to tell you the story privately sometime. It was an alone with him for an hour in a hotel room. It was like this little press junket thing. I think at one point in the interview, um, I think we were so disgusted with each other, we just stared at each other for 15 minutes in silence. But then we overcame that.
Oh good.
I think so. I think I was working through some father issues. I don't know. Anyway, I digress. So TV, Nickelodeon, a pilot called Schmutz. Was that ever filmed?
So I backing up a tiny bit. I worked with Amit Zappa on an MTV show called Web Riot, and we became friends. And so he and I wrote a pilot together.
Son of Frank Zappa.
Yeah,
Okay.
and he and I wrote a pilot called Bench Presley, the world's strongest private dick, which I think was ultimately called Bench Presley and Showgirl. And it was um, sort of like Dick Tracy in the future.
Mhm.
And Klasky Chupo, who's the production company who did Rugrats, which was on Nickelodeon, um, picked it up and produced it. And Bruce Campbell was the lead voice, and Tim Curry was in it. And so I got to
Wow.
be in a recording booth with Bruce Campbell and Tim Curry, which was pretty great. And so they then hired me Classy Shupo hired me to write pilots based on properties they had purchased from people that weren't writers, right? So Schmutz was one of those. It was about like all the grimy things under the furniture. So like a wad of gum and a penny and you know dust bunnies and things like that were the characters. So I wrote the pilot for that. I think they shot the pilot, and then I also did one for them called Turbo Snail,
Hmm.
um, which I also think they shot the pilot for, but neither of them went to
Okay.
series. Although there's a movie called Turbo Snail, which sounds an awful lot like the pilot I wrote for them. But I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You wrote for Sabrina, the animated series, which was ABC. It's pretty
Uh,
big time.
it was ABC and UPN. So it was back when
Okay.
the UPN network existed, and so we wrote episodes, and some of them aired on UPN, and some of them aired on ABC, and then they were all in reruns, I think, on UPN. Somehow there was a connection. Yeah, that was a
Okay.
fun job. Yeah.
What is this weird thing I've noticed with like people in the horror world that have these surprising family film credits?
And what's my surprising family film? You mean just the stuff that I wrote like for kids?
Yeah, the kid stuff. Why
Huh.
why is that?
I don't know.
From
You
one
know,
extreme to the other, or my favorite is horror film writers who suddenly they're all writing Hallmark Christmas romantic comedies. What
I
is
know
that?
several people that do that actually, and like the horror producers, like Fred Olin Ray, is like directing them all over the place. I think there's just it's just a market, right? Like there's Hallmark, does like 100 movies a year, Lifetime 100 movies a year, that kind of thing, and there's a market for it. Trust me, I've got one in my head, brewing in my head right now, Christmas movie. Um, so yeah, I have that question myself, but I think it's because it's like Christmas sort of feels like a genre film as well. Like there's the magic of Christmas, so there's some sort of supernatural thing that can be happening in there as well. Santa Claus, that kind of.
If the average middle American housewife knew that her favorite Hallmark Christmas films were written by gore loving gay filmmakers.
Right.
Who knew? Who knew?
Who knew?
All right,
Well,
one more.
mhm.
For Fox Family, you wrote Mega Babies, also known as Atomic Babies, and you also wrote the full series Bible. Now, what is a Bible for a TV series?
So Mega Babies, aka Atomic Babies, was a project that again it was for these two creatives had created this thing about like superhero babies. And but they weren't really writers, so they brought me on to flesh it out, write the pilot, and then write the Bible. And what the Bible is the document that literally is like all the characters and their backgrounds, all the character descriptions, all the premise of the show, the themes of the show, the do's and don'ts for like for what you can put into the episodes. Ultimately, will contain if the show goes to series, the arc of the stories and all the episodes. And so that's what I wrote. So what you start out with is just the like premise, rules, characters, just anything you might need to like show to a network. Like, here we've thought this through. Here's all the questions answered about this show. And
Hmm.
then it did end up getting picked up and went to series. And because I was a work for hire, I just got paid for my work doing that. I wasn't like credited as a creator or anything like that, which I probably should have been, honestly. Um,
Hmm.
but I was young and named the money. Yeah, and then I ended up writing an episode of it down the road.
So
Yeah,
when
it
you
was.
get these opportunities, there has to be a little, window of your career when you're thinking, wow, I'm going to be a big shot with the network. I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to be the next Ryan Murphy, even though Ryan Murphy didn't exist back then. But you know what I mean? It must be hard to not be seduced by that.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, no, no, no. It's like with each, I had a run of time where I was doing tons of episodic work on various shows. And I thought that would
Hmm.
never end. And then I took this turn into reality television, courtesy of my agent at the time. And that was back when being a writer on a reality show was a separate job than being a producer. Now it's the game has changed, and producers and like editor writers, producer editors, predators, like it's all changed. But back then, I would be hired to like sit down and either we'd get the information about whatever we were shooting the show about, and I would create the story that we would shoot to. Like we would go out and like using the real people and their information, we would then get them to shoot or as we were shooting, getting the information and like pointing them toward good story, the producers. And I did that for years and years and years and years. And it was ultimately I quit doing it because it was just soul destroying. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand the way we were manipulating people um, to get them to be on TV, dangling things like a new house in front of them to get them to like compromise themselves. And so I finally stopped doing it. I occasionally have dipped back in over the years for something I think is fun and sort of non-exploitative, but yeah, for the most part, I couldn't stomach it after a while, and that's when I went back to theater. Actually,
You know, in the 80s and 90s, when you're, coming of age and, starting to get your work produced, and right before, in the early 2000s when Ryan Murphy broke through with Nip Tuck, An American Horror Story, back in the day, isn't that the kind of career we kind of dreamt of, but didn't even think it could be? Because I remember when I first saw Nip Tuck, I thought, oh my goodness, this is the series I never could have even imagined being produced, but oh my goodness, this is amazing. I wish I would have done this.
yeah, I for me that happened more in theater. I saw
Hmm.
a production of the Annoyance Theater's show Co-ed Prison Sluts, the musical in
What
Chicago.
a
I saw.
great name.
Oh, what a great show! So good, so good. And it was. I think I may have even seen the very first preview of that show before the Annoyance was a
Mhm.
theater. I think it was done under a different company back then. And I saw that was like, that's the theater I want to do. Like that is exactly what I want to do, and I did it. TV, it's been more like I want to get in on that. Like Buffy, I wanted to get in on Buffy. My first Hollywood spec TV episode that actually got me some work was a Buffy spec. Um,
Mhm.
so I I've written pilots over the years. You're told to write pilots. I've written them. I've sold some that have never gone into, that have never been gone to series. And yes, when you're in it, it's like when your agent's negotiating the deal and you start hearing about like all the ways you're going to get paid for it. Like you're going to get paid for creating it. And then you're also getting an executive producer credit. And you get paid for that. And then if you write, you write an episode, you get paid for that too. And then you're going to get a piece of all the merchandising and you're going to get the reruns and all that stuff. And you start like seeing dollar signs in your eyes. And now that back then when I was doing it, there was a lot fewer options, although there were a lot of options because cable was a thing. But now there's so many like there's so much landscape to fill with television that I've actually considered trying to get back in the game
Mhm.
because it feels like
There's so much prestige TV now where it's actually very a lot of good work is being made.
there's too much good TV. Like you
Yeah.
could stop producing TV today, and you wouldn't have time to finish every TV series that exists before you died. Like it is, there's
Yeah.
just so much good TV out there. There's also a lot of bad TV. Let's be honest. But yeah, and there's a place for everything, no matter what your weird like. Nip Tuck was a show. I think it was on FX, right? Like it was, on
Mhm.
a network that
Yeah.
was at the time not one of the big four, and now, and an Anomaly, and so it's hugely popular. Now that kind of TV is everywhere. Like if you
Yeah.
have an idea, there's a place for it if it's good enough. So,
It's another thing to show, a young person now what the landscape was like before Nip Tuck. And things that
oh
are taken for granted, how exploitation is so woven into modern drama. Even something like The Walking Dead existing now, that people just take for granted the graphic violence and sexuality that, just a generation ago would have been some seedy Times Square grindhouse,
yeah.
not network TV.
Well, and the way they've sort of family it up, right? Like um, Big Love about polygamy, and there was that show. Can't remember the name of it, but about the guy with the giant penis who was a prostitute, but also
Yeah.
like a
A
you know
college teacher. Yeah.
yeah,
That
like
was Hung.
fun, and just
Yeah.
even the title, right? Like you can literally come in with any title, any premise, and there will be a place for it if it's good. I love it.
Dexter. I mean, Dexter was a game changer.
Yeah, yeah, like a serial murderer who's our sympathetic anti-hero. Yeah,
And that other one, to remember back when Sex and the City came out, that did stuff that no show had ever done before.
right. Supposedly, women talking about sex like women really talked about sex. I've had a lot of women say no, but it was certainly entertaining, and it was a show led by four women. It was their experience, and they didn't center me and men. I mean, men were part of it, but they didn't center men's storylines. And yeah, it was
I mean, even I blushed at some of Samantha's dialogue at first.
right. Or what's the I want to say Weeds, like the show about suburban mom selling pot, like
Right, right, Weeds. Yep, that was a big one. Yeah.
so.
And the thing is, after the fact, it seems natural. Well, of course, these shows came to be, but it always takes that first person to break that taboo. But to also, I wouldn't say normalize it, but it's kind of like they're saying, we didn't create this, this already exists. We're just now not pretending that it doesn't exist.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that's the whole thing of, I think there was this gold rush feel for a while. Let's be the first one to tackle this topic. Oh
Yeah.
no, marijuana's been done. What can we do? Oh, Mormon polygamy. Oh, darn it, that's been done.
Right.
Now that we're deep into the gold rush, we can't rely on that shock value. So I think it's kind of maybe pulling back to, let's just tell a really good story.
Yeah. Well, and those shows had to have good stories to exist. You know,
Right,
Breaking
right.
Bad, like that. Yeah.
Oh my God, so good. All right. Okay, we're gonna move into our home stretch here with your theater training, but I'm just gonna rattle off one or two more titles.
Sure.
At Casita del Campo,
Mhm.
this is now getting into live theater. You did a series of staged readings, which I thought was cool. Young Frankenstein, Desperate Living, Mommy Dearest. Were those all just straight from the movie script?
Yes, we started with Valley of the Dolls, which I got permission to do from the estate.
Okay.
And what we what I was doing was I was participating in AIDS Life Cycle, which is the biggest AIDS fundraising event I think in the world, right? Frankly, it's a bicycle ride from San Francisco to Los Angeles over a week. So I was
Okay.
raising funds for that, and so I decided to do Valley of the Dolls, like just do a reading of Valley of the Dolls, and got some friends together and did it. And that was a huge success. We made a ton of money. So over the years, I we did more of them. The big success was Mommy Dearest with Alexandra Billings. It was basically just got my hold of the script, cut it down a little bit, which was tough because that movie is genius from beginning to end. And yeah, we staged it with script in hand, but we had some effects and props and stuff like that, and charged like $20, for
Good.
as a
I bet there
donation.
was a
And
lot of audience participation in that one.
well, certainly people, some of the key lines. I mean, and every scene has a key line in it, right? Every scene has some quotable line.
Get
So
me
yeah,
the axe. No more
right,
wire hangers. The
right.
boys and the booze.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all there. So, and if you're coming to a reading of Mommy Dearest, you've seen Mommy Dearest. So it
Hmm.
was but yeah, no, those were tons of fun. We did some of them at Casita de Campo. We did a few at other theaters around town. But yeah.
Very good. Now, what was Attack of the Killer Bees? It makes me think of B movies. Was it a mashup of B movies that you loved? What was it?
Yeah, that was Reefer Madness for me was a huge hit in Chicago. That was done before we founded the theater company. After that, we founded the theater company, and then Attack of the Killer Bees. We'd done some other shows, but Attack of the Killer Bees was the first big hit of the Factory Theater. And I wrote it because we needed another play. We reopened Reefer Madness at the Factory, and it was doing okay. And then we tried a couple other plays, and they just didn't land very well. And we were desperate for a new play. So I was house sitting. I was living in the theater at the time, but I was house sitting for somebody over Christmas break. And I came up with this idea. taking all these B movies and like weaving the plots together, and then having two, protagonists just sort of making their way through this whole thing. And so I just came up with a list of the movies. So it's like, Reefer Madness is one of them, Night of the Living Dead, Nightmare on Elm Street, Women in Prison, Friday the 13th, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Trying to remember all of them. And wove those into a plot. And I wrote
So
that
was
script.
part of the fun for the viewer to see what B movie would be incorporated next?
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. Because you never knew what they were going into. Yeah. I wrote it
Hmm.
in 4 days and just like sat at a typewriter, mind you, and typed it out over Christmas break with nothing else to do, brought it in, and that version is what went on the stage with no revisions. And it ran for months and months and months. I think it might have run for a year, sold out houses. We closed the show just because we were tired of doing it. So, and that's published, and there's actually a production that's going to happen in like, I want to say February.
So if
Yeah.
this was like if someone made a movie about the production of the play and they wanted to embellish, it's like, minutes before opening night, your electricity is about to be shut off, but the advance ticket sales, they're running with the check to the electric company, you know.
Well,
Did
also
you
don't.
did you ever feel did you ever feel like that? You're on the verge of your heat being shut off, and because I know the hand to mouth feel of that.
Well, we had our power shut off at least once in the
Oh
theater
wow.
because we didn't pay the power bill. Yeah, no, and Reefer Madness opened during an ice storm in Chicago,
Mm.
like as did Reefer Madness actually the year before. No, we were like hand to mouth for that up until like we opened the theater. I want to say in like October, September, October, and and Attack of the Killer Bees opened in February. But for those first months, it was like avoiding the landlord, and living in the theater. That made it tough. Like having to like shower in the shower we had backstage and sneak down to my little apartment and get dressed, like get out the door before the landlord saw me. Because the landlord lived next door in the
Oh
rental office. Yeah, no, it was precarious. And then opening night of Attack of the Killer Bees, probably because we had 20 people in the cast, the house was full. We got a review in the Chicago Tribune, and then we were off and running. And from that moment on, the factory never worried about money again because every show that we did had an audience.
wow. All right. So hearing all this, I can see why you're willing to let go of Hollywood for a while and go back to your first love, the theater. So let me just find here the name of the college you're going to in the program.
Oh, I've actually graduated. So the
Oh my God.
yeah,
Now,
it's
was this
Hall.
the Hollins? Okay, why don't you, yeah, explain what this program is? It's an MFA. What made you go back to do this and what you're going to do with it now?
So 30 years after dropping out of my undergrad, which I did, I dropped out of undergrad and moved to Chicago to do theater, which I did. Um, I since moved to Los Angeles, and I was starting to think about teaching because I've never really taught, um, really. And so to do that, you kind of need an MFA. I had that one gig I told you about developing the musical. That was a teaching gig, and to get that gig, the university had to like bend over backwards to figure out how to get me in there without an advanced degree. And so I decided to get an MFA and started searching around for programs and was looking for a program that would take me without having an undergrad degree. And there were several that would, and Hollins was the one that really appealed to me. And the program, it's summers only. It's a summer semester. So you're there on campus in Virginia at Hollins University, and you do that for 4 years, and then which is the equivalent of basically 2 years of grad school, which is a sort of standard MFA program. And yeah, and then your thesis, and you have your MFA, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The workload was insanity, and but the what I came out of it with was connections in theaters all over the country. I got to go to the Kennedy Center a couple times, um, and have a relationship with the Kennedy Center as a playwright. I met really influential people that are still in my corner to this day. And it was absolutely the right decision to go $50,000 into debt to get my MFA.
Yeah. And so I bet you had a lot more practical experience than the other people in the program.
Most of them at the time, yeah, because I'd been doing it for 30 years. And but the program is interesting because there are people that are just out of their undergrad, and there's people that have been doing it a while. Um, but the great thing about it is I'd never taken a writing class in my life. Like I'd done improv classes, which are technically writing, but I'd never taken any sort of like structure, narrative, like any of that before. I was just doing it on instinct. So then I got there, and oh my gosh, it just opened my eyes to all of these tools that I can use now. And I think my playwriting has gotten much better.
So what do they use in classes now? Like what are the established play scripts that they hold up for you to emulate?
Well, it's interesting because in this program, the teachers rotate through because it's a summer program. They can get teachers from all over the country to come and spend their summer there because it's not a conflict. So each teacher has their own list. Like I took a theater for social justice class, which had a whole different thing than the adaptations class that I took, than the docudrama class I took. So we didn't really like it wasn't like Death of a Salesman is a perfect narrative. Like they weren't into that. They were more into here are the tools for narrative, and create your own and create your own voice, right? And so reading a lot of like I don't want to say lesser known plays, but like we weren't necessarily just reading the American theater canon, if that makes sense.
So it wasn't heavy on Tennessee Williams and Edward Albee.
I read zero of both of those in that program. No Arthur Miller. We read. I definitely was. Shakespeare was in there. Um, Carol Churchill. Trying to think. Um, but the next year it might be that, right? Just depending on your teacher.
Do you think there's a danger of being stuck in a certain era? Like when you grew up, you're influenced by this certain work, whether it's, Betty Davis and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane or A Streetcar Named Desire. And as we get older, we're still stuck with these ideals. I think it is harder as you get older to be more open to more current work, as opposed to you're 18, fresh out of high school, you're open to what's going on now. Is there a danger to be too sentimental and stuck on, the stuff that influenced you 40 years ago?
I think so. I think you can. Like I avoided that for a long time because I worked for MTV a lot, and
Mhm.
I was older than the MTV demographic. But MTV, their philosophy is they will let their viewers leave them because there will be new ones coming up, right? So they don't try to sort of age up. Um, and so that really kept me in touch with what was happening currently. Um, I look at Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks as an example. Mel Brooks sort of stuck with what he was doing, which was hilarious at one point. Doesn't necessarily hold up to like I rewatched High Anxiety the other day, and it just really didn't hold up. And his later movies just don't really land. I feel like Carl Reiner, on the other hand, hooked himself up and continued to hook himself up with younger comedians like Steve Martin, and throughout his career, and remained relevant and remained like in the mix as someone who um, was doing what was the current fashion or whatever. So I look at Carl Reiner as an example of how to as not keep current. Like it's not like I want to like surf the trends, but keep your eye on what's happening now and how you can fit your voice into that. There'll always be time for nostalgia, but the time is now to create now. And so I try to keep my ear to the ground in that
So
way.
after finishing this program, do you want to write something campy? Do you want to write a stage comedy? Do you want to go for an out and out drama? Do you want a social justice driven play? I mean, has it changed the subject matter you want to write about?
No, but what it's changed is how I approach it and how I build it. Like when I wrote Attack of the Killer Bees in 4 days, that was just me using my instincts and like how does this puzzle fit together. Right now I'm in the thick of a rewrite of a play based on a newspaper article, and I am on the fourth or fifth draft of it, and I'm probably only halfway there because I'm really trying to figure out how the characters operate within the world that I've created. So
Hmm.
I'm still doing like the crazy stuff, um, but I look at it differently, and it may not be perceived differently, but the way I create it, I feel like it's different.
Are you the kind of writer that keeps everything under wraps, or do you like to share your work with other trusted writers or directors to get feedback?
I always share stuff with people to get feedback constantly. Yeah, I like
So do
it.
you think,
Some writers don't like feedback. I love it.
okay, so going through this program, did you forge any bonds with other writers that you trust getting feedback from?
Oh, sure. And we're still in contact. I mean, it's been a few years since I've been out of the program. We're still in contact. And I'm also in contact with people from the Kennedy Center, probably
Hmm.
more with the people from the Kennedy Center directly. In fact, I just saw some
Hmm.
of them at this writer's retreat that I had. But yeah, definitely. Definitely.
You know, people who've never been in a writing class before, they don't know the terror of offering your work up for critique. And I
Yeah.
think the irony of it is sharing it with other writers, obviously your experience, but especially a beginning writers class where it's like the blind leading the blind. It's like, why on earth would you let another beginning writer give you comments on your work? But that's how a lot of classes are. It's almost
Oh,
like
yeah.
if you can survive that, because these beginning writers can be really brutal to each other. They don't know how to finesse a comment. And I think the whole purpose of critiquing is just to rip you apart. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that my program taught me was how to give feedback and how to
Yeah.
take feedback. And no feedback is like, to me, I'll take all the feedback, but what you learn quickly, I mean, hopefully, is that, you know, if I get 10 notes, I'll take one. People have their own opinions about your work, and their context and their perspective isn't yours. And so, you know, for me, most feedback is about finding the nuggets of feedback that actually I can use, um, versus like, oh no, they didn't like my play, and because I've got all this, negative feedback. No, it's just their opinions about it. Which is why there should be sort of a balance. I feel like there should be like I'm in a playwriting lab, and so we offer pages, and everybody sort of chimes in, and of course most of the people in the lab are like established, well trained playwrights, and there's a lot of actors in there that have done a lot of work, and so you can kind of trust that they're coming from a good place.
Mhm.
um but then there's that, the trusted group, but then there's also, you want to know how it just plays cold to people. So I will do things where my stuff is read in front of people that I don't know, just to find out, like, what do they think about it.
Yeah, because
Some
a
people
lot of
can't take it.
people,
It's hard. It's really hard. I won't tell you, because it is nerve wracking to, like I said earlier, when you create art, you're confessing, right? So to like hand your truth to a bunch of people you don't know is nerve.
it's your baby too. You know, it's hard
Yeah,
not to take it personally.
yeah.
But I like the cold part because I think a lot of beginning writers, before they read it, they do a 15-minute explaining of it.
Mm,
And it's like, well, no, you can't really do that at each performance. You can't explain your script before it's performed,
right.
you know? Well, here's the
Yeah.
two conclusions I've come to over the years about critiquing. First of all, I think they have to like your genre. You know, don't let a non horror fan critique horror because they're probably going to hate it. They have a predisposition. Plus, they don't know the conventions of horror and the things people love about it and want to see in it. I think that's really important of any genre. But the thing I have found is people want to project their story onto yours.
Sure.
So when I talk about critiquing, or if I critique someone's work, I say, you know what? I don't want to project my work onto yours. I just want to see if you have realized your intention. So I might say, well, what's your intention with this work?
Mhm.
I'll comment if I think you fulfilled that. As
Right.
opposed to, I think you should have turned, your Hallmark romantic comedy into torture porn, Saw 5, you
Right.
know? And
Although
I
I'm there
think
for that. I'm absolutely there for that. But I agree with
exactly. Wouldn't that be great? The new Hallmark Christmas torture porn romance?
you. Yeah, I'm in.
But well, I want to wrap up with LA. The theaters have been closed, they're coming back open. And I was down in LA about 2 years ago and I got introduced to some live theater. And I was really impressed with North Hollywood. What do you call that? The North Hollywood Theater District?
There is a theater district up, like a little theater arts district up there. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't there a clever abbreviation like NoHo or something?
Sure. There's no North Hollywood is NoHo, West Hollywood is WeHo. Yeah.
Okay. So NoHo, I mean, there were a lot of theaters, and it's the first time I've seen really small, the storefront theaters we were talking about, tiny theaters, these little black box theater that it's lucky if they, have 40 seats in them. But you kind of
Yeah.
love that too. Just walking into one, you think, "Oh my goodness, I want to drop everything and start a theater company here."
Right. And that's what people
And
thought, and they did that, and they started that company. Yeah, there's
and
a
they
ton of
did.
people, actually.
Yeah, and the one I went to, and I'm so glad this is all pre-COVID, but I went to Zombie Joe's Underground Theater.
Yeah, I
And
have a
I
friend
think
that
that to me that would be such your kind of place, I would think.
you would think, and I have a friend that's in their stuff, and I've yet to get there. The but which is my failing, absolutely. But there is a lot of theater here. There's actually quite a bit, and some of it quite good. Like any town, there's some really great theater, and there's some not so great theater. Um, but there is more than one might imagine here. So I
And
work at a
what I liked about North Hollywood is there are big seated, legitimate theater playing, brand name stuff down to the 30 to 40 seat, storefront theater. There's this whole range, within this very small period. And I like that variety. There was something for everyone.
yeah. There, well, and it's all over town. I mean, the NoHo it's named its art district, but there's definitely other like little pockets of theater areas all over the place in the area. Yeah.
Does that inspire you to not only write more, but to maybe start another theater company in LA?
Well, it would be hard to write more because I literally do it every day. Like I'm at some point every day, no matter what I'm doing, I've written something. Um, Starting a theater company is really, really, really hard. It is an incredible amount of effort to do it. I don't know if I have that energy anymore in my 50s. In my 20s, I was, able to do it, but I'm with a company right now called NTS Theater Company. I'm part of their playwrights lab. They're a really great company in town, and that's enough for me at the moment. Like you know, well, I'm also in the playwrights union, which is just a. It's not a producing company. It's just a group of people. So those two things are enough for me in Los Angeles at
So
the
at this
moment.
stage, do you see yourself more as an artist in residence for someone else's theater company?
I would love to be that. I'm a member of the playwrights lab at NTS, so it's not wouldn't be really considered in like a playwright in residence because there's about 30 of us,
Hmm.
but we're certainly members of the company in the broader sense. They've got an acting company; those are the actual members of the company, but we're members of the lab.
Do you
But
have
I'm
the
still like
patience?
getting my
But do you have
stuff
the
out.
patience to wait? When you have your own theater company, you write it, you know it's going to be produced. I think it's really hard to write it and be at someone else's mercy to give you the green light.
Well, you develop that thick skin, I think, pretty early. I mean, I am. So I have published work that is gets produced all the time, and I'm still like, I'm working in the playwrights lab right now, and I've done some stuff for Antaeus. That's great. I also have stuff, percolating all over the country. So I
Hmm.
don't necessarily, it's just the game of being a playwright. Like you're just constantly sort of looking for the opportunity to arise. And
So, what's the name of the current play you're writing?
the one I just, and I think this title might change. It's called Ghost Bicycle, and it's the one that's based on a newspaper article about a person being killed on their bike on a frontage road in a off in a small town. So I've set it in Montana, where I'm from, and it's sort of a who done it and a why done it about this person being killed on their bike.
And this is a stage play.
Yeah,
So, where does most of the play take place? Like, is it like people talking about the crime after the fact indoors, or?
it's well, the crime happens sort of on stage, in a way, and then it's both the aftermath and the flashbacks to before. So we're sort of finding out like people's relationships to each other, and maybe there's some suspicion of people that have done this because the crime, it's a hit and run, so no, so people don't know who did it. So yeah, it's that's how
This
there's
sounds
some homophobia
serious.
involved. Huh?
This doesn't sound campy or
Oh, it's
humorous.
not. No, it's really 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 melancholy actually.
So, what prompted this? I mean, this is a total 180. I mean, how many serious dramas have you written?
Well, since I was in grad school, many actually. Um, I sort of leaned into that as something I hadn't written before. And this one was written as an assignment in one of the classes. The very first draft was written as an assignment. And
Hmm.
then I was looking for something to develop, and I was sort of going back through some of my past work that hadn't moved past the first draft. And this one jumped out as like something that had potential to be something that had potential that if I told you the story right now, it's about a guy who gets killed on his bicycle. It's like, how would you put that on stage? And so that's one of the reasons why I sort of leaned into it.
Well, you know how in Miss Saigon, when it first came out, they like required the theaters. I think that one theater they had to like cut out part of the theater to build something taller so that prop helicopter could come in. Do you kind of
Right.
remember that? Do you
I
think it
sure
would
do.
hurt? Do you think it would hurt your chances of this script being produced if you required the theater would have to like be reconstructed to have a giant car being kind of airlifted down and some special kind of animatronics for the bicycle scene?
100%. It would never be produced. Like, Sean Abley does not have that power in theater to get his car wreck on stage play produced.
See, now that it sounds like Waiting for Guffman. You know the scene where he goes into the city council.
Yeah.
You know he wants to up the budget for the play, and he goes, "How much do you want?" He goes, $100,000.
Right. Yeah, and they're like, you're crazy.
No, I just think it's so funny to like make some outrageous demand that would just automatically mean no one would ever produce your play. Wouldn't that be
Well,
just kind of fun to brainstorm things you can put in the production notes that guarantee no one would ever produce this?
we did have a class where one of the assignments was write an impossible play. And but then of course you hand it to a director and they come up with the ways to do it. So,
Oh my God. See, I love stuff like that, you know?
mhm.
All right. Well, to wrap up, I mean, obviously, we could talk forever about a million things. People can go to your website, look at the horror side, the Fangoria side. I'm actually going to look up some of your plays. I love the fact you have these published. For people who don't read plays, they're actually plays are readable. When you read a play, it's like it comes alive in your mind. It's like reading a screenplay. So, what would be your words to people who are uncomfortable or have never read a play script, the enjoyment that they get out of just reading it?
I think if the within moments of opening a play script and reading, your brain will click over to adapting to the play format. because really what it is it's spoon fed to you. It's actually almost easier to read a play
Mhm.
because the stage direction is there describing everything that's going on, character, and then their lines and maybe parentheticals telling you how they're delivering them. So it's it's not a high barrier to enjoy a play on the page.
And out of all your published plays, what would be a good one for them to start with?
Of the published stuff, I would say for something short for kids, it would be The Adventures of Rose Red, Snow White's less famous sister. For something more for adults, probably a play called Absence Makes the Heart, which is
Hmm.
a very serious play about,
Okay.
well, it's about suicide, although it doesn't happen. The suicide has already happened before the play starts, so it's people reacting. But
All right. Okay, wrap up. 5 quick questions.
sure.
Final. Number one, what work of yours, whether it's a play, a film script, a magazine column, are you most proud of?
Probably the play The End of the World with Prom to Follow.
When was the last time you saw that performed live?
A couple years ago, like the year before pandemic, I saw it done. It was done here in locally.
Okay, that didn't qualify as a question. Okay, question number two, and this is an important one for someone in their 50s or beyond that's accomplished a lot, but is thinking of going back to school, but is afraid to. What would your words of advice be?
I went back to school thinking that I would be a terrible student because I dropped out of college and I was a terrible student in high school. But what I realized when I went back to school was that if you're going back for something you want to do, if you're choosing to go to school, you will more than likely excel. And so I would say give yourself the gift of of following that instinct that grad school is the thing that you want to do because because it's like going to summer camp, like you're just doing the thing you want to do, you're not like doing math and biology
Hmm.
basically.
Okay, three. In our era that is so TV and movie oriented, why should we still care about live theater and stage plays, and how can we keep that alive and relevant?
I think theater will always be relevant just because it's of the experience. It's live human beings in a room together experiencing something, and you don't get that at the movies, you don't get that watching TV. I love movies and TV. I don't, they are absolutely amazing and valid forms of art. But with theater, you are connecting with other human beings in an artistic context, and I think that's really important, and I think that's why it should survive. I also think it will always survive because you can always do theater as long as you have a stage and seats. You don't even need power. You can do it in the apocalypse.
Question four.
Mhm.
Pick a famous person, whether they're in showbiz or history, larger than life person. Who would you want to adapt into a story, whether it's a screenplay or maybe some play where you could immortalize, one of your icons? Who would you like to do?
That's a good question.
I mean, it could be Jacqueline Suzanne while she's writing Valley of the Dolls. It
Right.
could be Carol Burnett, post
I
Carol
think
Burnett show. It could be
right. I think it would be Roger Corman.
hmm,
Yeah, I think it'd be Roger Corman.
while he's still alive or after.
Well, that'd be, if we was still alive, it'd have to be like, chapter one, up through 2021. Um, But yeah,
Do
I'm
you think it's
fascinated.
hard? Is it hard to write about someone who's still alive? Could you do that?
Well, I have a play called Popcorn Girl, which is technically about some people that are still alive. It's based on a real murder that happened in Los Angeles in 1997. So some of the people are still alive, but I've fictionalized them. So I just sort of that so no, that wasn't difficult at all. When I wrote the thing for my friend, Confessions of Male Pinup, that was easy because he was amenable. I would think it would be hard if the person was like not amenable to it.
Hmm. Okay, without any prep, I'm just gonna. This is thrown at you. You had
Sure.
no preparation for this. Without being ironic or campy or feeling that you're rising above the material, on the spot create a plot for like the ultimate Hallmark Christmas romantic comedy movie.
Um, well, it would involve Santa Claus, because I am deeply invested in the magic of Christmas. Even though I'm not religious, I'm actually agnostic. But there's something about the Christmas spirit, quote unquote, that I really am drawn to. So it would have a magical element, and it would be not Miracle on 34th Street, but it would certainly be something where people are shown that the magic of Christmas um, exists. It's funny, I'm saying this because a friend of mine just wrote something like this. Um, so I don't want to like take his idea. Um, yeah, I think that would be it. I mean, it was, it's the Christmas stuff. You want it to like have a beginning, middle, and end. So it's not going to be like open ended like a horror movie. It's gonna end with people discovering that regardless of the hard stuff that they've gone through in the course of this movie, that Christmas can bring them together.
So it wouldn't involve like an evil developer that wants to tear down the Boys and Girls Club.
I mean, it could. I don't want to give away all my secrets because I might write one, quite frankly.
That'd be cool. I think mine would be it'd have to be a Christmas wedding. It
Mhm.
just anything with a wedding adds a layer of craziness.
Right. Yes.
And,
That does
and
make
don't you
it make
think? And Kate Hudson, isn't she old enough now to be playing Mothers of the Bride?
a good question. I don't know how old she is. I mean, Goldie Hawn is still like ageless. So Goldie Hawn, I mean, Goldie Hawn would technically be playing the grandmother of the bride, but I could still see her as the mother of the bride.
Yeah, she's in her 70s now.
Oh my gosh, I can't even believe it.
She
So is
looks
Elvira.
great.
Elvira's in her 70s, and she
Oh my
looks
god, did you
really
read
good.
did you read her new autobiography?
I haven't yet, but it's on its way. I've ordered it.
Getting good reviews. All right, so camera's on you, so take us out, say whatever you want as a little bye-bye.
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I'm always about making sure that you're creating art, whether it be for a profession or a hobby. I think art is incredibly important in someone's life. So either consume it or create it, but make sure that you have art in your life.